Over 2,000 years ago, on December 25th, a baby was born in Bethlehem to the virgin temple girl who had dedicated herself only to the Lord, Mary. This city, where the Almighty became incarnate, was in the province of Judea. However, this video is not about its history during the time of Christ, but rather about its situation in the present day. After the death and resurrection of Christ, the situation in Judea changed rapidly. By 135 AD, the Jews had attempted a second revolt against their Roman rulers and failed. This led to the Jewish exodus from the region, as they scattered wherever they could find refuge within the reaches of the Roman Empire. The age of Second Temple Judaism ended, and the Holy Land of the Jews was destroyed, and only a sparse population of Jews remained in Galilee. The Romans, wanting to signify this demographic change, renamed Judea to Syria Palestina. Over the course of centuries, Christianity would become legal in the Roman Empire, and soon after, the state religion. The Christian presence in the region grew until the Bishop of Jerusalem was granted the status of Patriarch in 451 AD, completing the Pentarchy, or the 5 ancient patriarchates. The Christian presence would continue to grow in Palestine, and a majority of the Christians living in the region of Jerusalem would continue to be Orthodox, despite the majority of Middle Eastern Christians falling to schism, but all would not continue to be well. Following the invention of Islam, violent Muslim forces would invade and force Arabization upon the Palestinian Christians, forcing them to relinquish the language the Lord spoke, Aramaic, in favor of Arabic. Many were also forced to apostatize to Islam, which quickly became the religious majority in the region. The struggles of the Patriarchate of Jerusalem weren't over, however. Following the Great Schism of 1054, the Patriarch, much like every patriarch besides Rome, would side with Constantinople and remain in the Orthodox Church. 50 years later, in 1099, Crusaders would make their way to Jerusalem and exiled the Patriarch, at the time Simeon II, as well as the local Orthodox population that was responsible for the area. The Patriarchs of Jerusalem remained in exile until 1187 AD, when the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem fell. The Patriarchs of Jerusalem continued to guide their flock despite the difficulties of dealing with Islam, and even Catholics and later Protestants. But it can be argued that the greatest threat to the Patriarchate was yet to come. In the last century, there has been a mass exodus of Christians from the Holy Land. Following World War II, the United Nations Partition Plan was proposed and initiated. This plan would cut up what was known at the time as Mandatory Palestine into 2 areas, a Jewish area and a Palestinian area. Before this was initiated, there was a Jewish minority in the region. However, following the partition plan, Jews from all across the world congregated there, an area they hadn't lived in for almost 2,000 years. Many of the Jews returning had been living in other regions for hundreds of years, and barely resembled their first-century counterparts culturally or genetically. A telling instance of this was the phenomenon of the Hebraization of surnames. Many Jews immigrating to the newly formed Jerusalem, in an attempt to justify their presence in Palestine, would Hebraize their names to sound more Middle Eastern. Just one example of this was when future Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's father, Benzion Melekowski, immigrated to Mandatory Palestine. He Hebraized his surname from Melekowski to Netanyahu, which means God has given. Though it was more common during the 20th century, it continues to be a practice for Jews newly immigrating to Israel. The UN voted for the partition plan, and the Jewish leadership, the Yeshuv, led by David Ben-Gurion, also followed suit with plans to establish a Jewish state despite open opposition from the Palestinian majority and the powers in the region. On November 30th, 1947, the day after the UN vote, Palestinian militias retaliated against the oncoming Jewish population by attacking buses near Lydda, Palestine, killing Jewish passengers. This marked the beginning of escalating violence. Armed groups on both sides began attacking villages, neighborhoods, and transportation routes. Full-scale war broke out between the Palestinians who had been living there for millennia and the new Zionist immigrants who were now imposing in the region. Conflict after conflict forced many Christians to flee the region en masse. After Israel declared independence on May 14, 1948, even more Christians were forced out. Constituting 8% of mandatory Palestine's population in 1947, they now make up just 2% of the population in the area of what is now known as Israel. These trends continue to decline even to this day. Before we continue, I have to say first and foremost, thank you for all the support on my channel. It's been a wonderful journey so far, looking into many things and learning about my faith and history. While I've loved creating all of my previous videos, this is my most important video to date. Please watch it to the end and learn what's really going on in Israel. If you end up wanting to help, there will be trustworthy donation links in the description. If you end up enjoying this video and want to see more of my content, please check out my other videos as well. While this video is broadly about Christians in Israel, I usually talk about Orthodox Christianity specifically. Also, since Israel's establishment, Christians have faced significant subjugation. While there are earlier events that could serve as the starting point, this video will begin with certain events in 2015 surrounding the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The timeline will generally follow a chronological approach, but certain events before 2015 will be touched on as needed for clarification and context. Lastly, all of the information in this video is accurate. No literal event described is speculation or misinformation. Unless I specifically state something is a theory, it is a sourced fact. From time to time, I will add my own commentary on what I think about certain statements and events. That will also be made clear. If any individual wishes to confirm any of the information presented, all of the sources for this video will be in the description below. All that being said, thank you so much, and let's continue. It might shock many who aren't familiar with the Christian presence in the Middle East, but in Jerusalem, the tomb of Christ still stands. It's housed in an aedicule, or a small shrine that stands inside a church called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's an Orthodox church that was first established in 326 AD. Though it's an Orthodox church, it's shared between three branches of Christianity in the current day: the Orthodox Christians who first founded it, the Roman Catholics, specifically those in the Franciscan order who dedicate themselves to the protection of the Holy Land, and the Oriental Orthodox, a group of Christians that formed with their rejection of the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD. In this case specifically, Armenian Orientals. Orthodox, Catholic, Oriental Orthodox, and even some Protestant parishioners from across the world come to Jerusalem to visit the church and venerate or pray before the tomb every year. But it seemed that this tradition would come to a strict halt very soon. In 2015, a series of events began unfolding. It started with an unannounced intervention. On the 17th of February 2015, Israeli police entered the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and arbitrarily sealed off the Holy Tomb of Christ. After much pushback from church officials, they left 3 hours later, but issued an order demanding that concerns regarding the Tomb of Christ be addressed immediately. The official justification for this shutdown and the order were safety concerns. The police claimed that the shrine surrounding the tomb was so unstable that it was in imminent danger to pilgrims and parishioners. However, things weren't as simple as they seemed. In response, the three historic custodians of the church, the Orthodox Christians, the Roman Catholics, and the Oriental Orthodox, set aside their differences and united. In a joint letter sent to Avigdor Lieberman, the Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, by the Greek Patriarch of Jerusalem, Theophilos III, the Franciscan Custos of the Holy Land, Father Pier Battista Pisaballa, who would later go on to become the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem in 2020, and the Armenian Patriarch of Jerusalem, Patriarch Nurhan Manogian, titled Protest of the Three Communities Against the Closure of the Aedicule of the Holy Sepulchre, it is written, quote, "On the 17th of February 2015, Israel police attached to the David substation of the Jerusalem police suddenly effected entry into the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre and took it upon themselves to force closure of the aedicule and rotunda of the Holy Sepulchre Church, and to obstruct the entry of pilgrims and visitors. The stated reason for this closure was their unsupported allegation that the structure of the aedicule was not safe enough for pilgrims to enter. Regarding the actual state of the stability of the aedicule, we, far better than anyone else, know that the structure needs to be properly restored. Yet, we have not been presented with any evidence that somehow some danger appeared out of nowhere that had not been there the day before that drastic police action. You surely must understand, sending in a police force to impose closure of this shrine, especially in the abrupt manner in which this was done, shows absolute contempt for our communities and their rights, as well as for the faith that brings pilgrims from all parts of the world to pray and visit at this holiest place." End quote. Determined to eliminate any doubt over the structure's integrity, they launched an ambitious restoration effort, starting with the tomb itself, raising funds to ensure that this sacred site remained untouched by outside interference. The project did go underway. As the letter made clear, the church did not want such a thing to ever happen again, and it was technically true that the structure of the shrine needed repairs. So these repairs should have done the trick. In a wonderful documentary called The Secrets of Christ's Tomb Explorer Special, the restoration process of the shrine was covered. The coercive aspect of the initiative isn't mentioned at all, but it nevertheless documents the process quite well. The head of the project, Professor Antonia Marapoulou, approached the project with due reverence and should be commended. The project also had unintended beneficial results, such as the confirmation of the age of the tomb. When the marble slab covering Christ's burial bed was removed for the first time in centuries, archaeologists expected to find only rubble or a more recent structure. Instead, they found an intact and empty limestone burial bed, which aligned with historical accounts of Jesus' tomb. Scientists then analyzed mortar samples from the tomb structure, which confirmed that the earliest layer of mortar dated back to 345 AD, matching the timeline of Emperor St. Constantine's construction of the original church. This meant that not only had Emperor Constantine visited the tomb as the Orthodox had held for centuries, but also that the tomb itself predated 345 AD. This was significant because it was the first scientific validation of the tomb's historical authenticity. And before, many skeptics thought there was no real validity to this ancient belief of the Christians. For example, some Protestant groups had claimed that Christ's tomb was in fact at another location, relatively nearby, called the Garden Tomb. Though nowadays, even most secular scholars agree that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre houses the real tomb of Christ. Throughout the construction process, there were even reports of scientifically unexplainable measurements when the tomb was being analyzed. The thermal reading instruments would stop working when scanning over the tomb. Since it was true that the repairs were in order for the tomb, the Christians had hoped that this requirement had been made of them in good faith. They had hoped that this would alleviate any remaining safety concerns, as the Israeli police had only presented issues with this one structure to church clergy and staff. However, there was a different outcome awaiting the faithful. These restorations didn't seem to do the trick, because the police found more excuses to enter, intrude on services, to impose new restrictions and rules on pilgrims. Currently, the church is working on repairing the underground sewer system, which was recently called into question. It seems the 2015 safety concerns set a new precedent in this contemporary age of what one might call civilized subjugation. After all, if these concerns were truly made in good faith, wouldn't they have approached the patriarch beforehand, or the abbot of the Holy Sepulchre? Wouldn't they have sent out a formal notice or called for a formal meeting? Yes, they would have, but that's not what happened. They simply barged in one day, without prior notice, and closed down the site. Further, the police upon entry had claimed that the shrine was in imminent danger to parishioners, and that's why they had to immediately close down the area and stand guard. If that's the case, why would they simply leave after 3 hours and demand the reconstruction from afar? Did the imminent danger somehow disappear? Another theory, of course, is that this was an attempt to bog down an already financially struggling church with repairs they couldn't afford. Throughout much of the world, churches have long been granted tax-exempt status, a recognition not of privilege, but of purpose. Rooted in the understanding that these institutions serve the spiritual, moral, and often charitable needs of a society, this exemption reflects a respect for their unique role, whether through feeding the hungry, caring for the sick, or offering a place of religious worship and prayer for the people. Churches are not seen as businesses, but as sacred spaces worthy of a measure of protection from the burdens of civic taxation. However, it seems not everyone holds that same opinion. Though church property was traditionally exempt from taxes in Israel, in the first half of February 2018, the Jerusalem municipality issued warning letters and commenced legal action to collect taxes from the local churches. This aggressive campaign was spearheaded by Nir Barkat, a Likud politician and then mayor, who sought to tax so-called non-religious church properties, even ordering the freezing of church bank accounts. Without any real legal basis, the municipality arbitrarily ruled that the historic 200-year exemptions applied only to places of worship, while all other church-owned properties would be subject to taxation. In the following months, the Tel Aviv, Ramleh, and Nazareth municipalities followed suit with similar taxation orders. The Jerusalem municipality specifically commented that the reason for these newly imposed taxes was that the church had not submitted the necessary requests for tax exemptions over the last few years. The other municipalities did not immediately publish comments, and it was unclear if the municipalities acted in a coordinated effort, but you can be the judge of that. Not only did these municipalities seek to begin taxing the churches on their non-sacred properties, but they also sought back taxes going back all the way to 1994. The amount of taxes in total across the churches was approximately 650 million shekels, or around $186 million. Supporters of these measures insisted that these taxes were justified since they were only applied to commercial enterprises, as many countries do indeed tax commercial church properties. Ignoring the fact that one country's laws aren't a justification for another country having similar laws, this isn't even necessarily the case. Many countries, including first world countries in Europe and America, don't tax commercial properties across the board. There are exceptions based on what the business is and where the funds go. In America, for example, if the business is intrinsically tied to the church's religious purpose, such as selling Bibles or religious items, these commercial properties can be exempt. A hotel, specifically made for pilgrims needing shelter while visiting a pilgrimage site, would fall under such a category. A restaurant specifically made for pilgrims needing food, sometimes fast-friendly, while visiting a pilgrimage site, falls under this category, as both of these businesses are intrinsically tied to the necessities surrounding a pilgrimage, food and shelter in a foreign land. Additionally, the income from these businesses do not serve to enrich the pockets of owners. They go straight to the church's charitable initiatives, services that benefit the state, like schools, hospitals, and homes for the elderly. This is charity. What justification is there to tax charity? Is that the norm in any country? As well as that, the churches in Jerusalem, by long-standing tradition, were not taxed even on commercial properties. For 70 years since the establishment of the State of Israel, the law of the land did not state that the churches needed to pay taxes on their commercial property. So what is the justification of nearly 30 years of back taxes? On top of it all, even if these taxes were justified, Arnona, or Israel's municipal property tax, is paid by the residents of an apartment rather than the property owner. Considering the fact that these church properties have residents who oversee the properties themselves, sometimes called guardians, it's strange that the property owners would be taxed instead of the residents. So what is the justification for this deviation from normal taxation laws? The only theory that presently comes to mind for all of this is attempting to bankrupt the churches in Israel. On the 25th of February, the Churches of the Holy Sepulchre issued a joint letter in response to this initiative. It read, quote, "Recently, this systematic and offensive campaign has reached an unprecedented level as the Jerusalem municipality issued scandalous collection notices and orders of seizure of church assets, properties, and bank accounts for alleged debts of punitive municipal taxes. These actions breach existing agreements and international obligations which guarantee the rights and privileges of the churches. In what seems as an attempt to weaken the Christian presence in Jerusalem, the greatest victims in this are those impoverished families who will go without food and housing, as well as the children who will be unable to attend school." End quote. And while these back tax measures were being fought off by local Christian groups, another plan was brewing. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, during both the Ottoman Empire and British Empire's ownership of the territory of Palestine, the Orthodox Church in Jerusalem was able to acquire much land and much property. Around 1,110 acres, or about 1.72 square miles. Land was used for churches, monasteries, and chapels, but also hostels for pilgrims seeking the Holy Land. Many apartments and houses that people would be able to stay in during their trips to visit many holy places. As well as that, this land was used for agricultural development. The Catholics and Orientals in the area also had similar initiatives, though not to the extent that the Orthodox were able to achieve. In the 1950s, just after the State of Israel was first established, these churches were put under pressure to lease their lands. They were given ultimatums: lease your church property to organizations like the Jewish National Fund, or the government will immediately and forcefully acquire your properties. The intent behind this decision was clear: to support Jewish resettlement, as organizations like the JNF were specifically created to buy land and encourage Jewish resettlement in the Palestinian area. The JNF specifically stipulates that only Jews can buy, mortgage, or lease JNF land. Article 23 of the JNF lease states that the leasee must pay compensation to the JNF if this stipulation is violated. The churches, given no other option besides completely relinquishing their land, offered up many non-sacred territories to these 99-year-long leases. This type of deal is sometimes referred to as virtual ownership, giving entities like the JNF long-term control over the properties, while the churches retained only a nominal ownership. Much of the church's land was leased to the JNF during this time, and the church administrations of the 20th century believed these properties would eventually be returned to future generations as agreed. Despite spanning generation upon generation, these leases were still understood to be temporary in nature. However, the Israeli state had different plans in mind. Over time, through the JNF, the Israeli government built permanent residential neighborhoods on these lands. Naturally, many Jewish settlers moved in. The word settler in the context of Israel refers to Israeli citizens who live in settlements built in territories captured by Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War, primarily in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and previously in Gaza. To the Jews, settlers are seen as pioneers reclaiming ancestral Jewish land. To the local Muslims and Christians, settlers are part of an occupation, taking land unlawfully. Some examples of these settlements that were eventually built on church land were wealthy neighborhoods like Talbeh, where the current prime minister and previous president's residences are located, or Nayat, which was the first housing project in Jerusalem built by Anglo immigrants to Israel. Until an official name was announced in 1963, it was known as Hashikon Anglo-Saxon, or the Anglo-Saxon neighborhood, because it was full of British Jews. It just goes to show how foreign these people were to the region. Even Israel's parliament, the Knesset, is built on Greek Orthodox-owned land. The real problem started when the JNF tried to renew or renegotiate its leases with the Orthodox Church long before they were supposed to expire, and the JNF offered to pay much less than the land was actually worth. This put the church in a tough financial position because it was already financially strained, and now it was being asked to extend valuable leases for very little return, so the church felt stuck, holding on to lands that were losing money while being pressured to renew long leases on even more unfair terms. They were carrying a heavy financial burden without any benefit. At the same time, the church had other initiatives. They were running schools, hospitals, miscellaneous community benefit projects. On top of all of this, they knew that the JNF and the Israeli government wouldn't act in good faith if they were to discuss any business relations, as they hadn't ever acted in good faith thus far. So, they were forced to sell some of these lands in secret to other private investors. They used the acquired money to help in their charitable endeavors and save themselves from bankruptcy. However, these decisions were not met without controversy. The issue some Israeli members of the public took with this decision was that while the church saved herself from financial bankruptcy and saved their charitable endeavors, the Jewish settlers and communities that had developed on the church land were now in danger of losing their homes. The settlers feared that when their leases ended, they would face the choice of either paying high sums to renew their leaseholds with the private investors, or having to sell their homes and move. Prior to the sales, the residents had assumed that the JNF would succeed in extending the leases with the church when they expired. There was an uproar, and many blamed the church and accused them of acting improperly. Zionist outlets also pushed this narrative, despite the fact that the church was forced to lease their own property and then was being pressured into continuously losing money on that property. It was somehow their fault that they had no choice but to sell it. Nevertheless, in response to the sale by the church, the Knesset introduced the Bill of Church Lands. Around February 25, 2018, the 20th Knesset member, Rachel Azaria, along with Tali Vloslav, Akram Hashan, Yal Cohen-Faran, and Miki Levy, introduced a proposed tenant rights law on leased land that was sold. This bill firstly shortly reviewed the history of land leasing that occurred in Jerusalem that we've covered thus far, though it didn't expand on the situation and of course completely ignored the coercive aspect of the entire endeavor. Then, using the previous sales of church land as justification, the bill went on to state, quote, "It is proposed to establish an arrangement according to which land for residential purposes for which a lease agreement was signed with the Jewish National Fund or any other leasee, and a right to sublease for residential purposes has been granted therein, and the rights in the land in respect of which they were transferred to other private entities, the rights in respect of the said lands will be transferred to state property. It is further proposed that the other factors will be entitled to compensation from the Jewish National Fund for transferring their rights in land to the benefit of the state." End quote. Essentially stating that the plan is to set up a system where land used for housing that was leased to the Jewish National Fund or others, and where people were allowed to sublease it, will become state property if the land was later sold to private companies. These private companies will be given compensation by the Jewish National Fund for giving up their rights to the land in favor of the state. Upon this bill being introduced in the Knesset, it immediately gained 40 signatures within the Knesset, which is around a third of the votes. It had a lot of support. To a lot of the Orthodox Christians in Jerusalem, this almost felt like a long-term land grab. Step 1. Pressure the church to lease away their land to the JNF, wait for leases to near their end, and then threateningly push for the renegotiation of the terms to throw the church in a difficult financial position. The church is then forced to secretly sell the properties to avoid bankruptcy and continue their charitable operations. Then, the JNF and propaganda outlets publicly blamed the church for acting against the interests of the people, leading to public outcry against the Christians. And finally, introduce legislation that will absorb the recently sold church land as state land anyway, completely cutting out the church and permanently nationalizing the church land, which is what the church wanted to avoid by leasing the land in the first place. All while villainizing the church by leaving out crucial information and painting her as an uncaring entity that's corrupt, while the Israeli government is looking out for the interests of the people. Keep in mind that this series of events wasn't exclusive to the Orthodox Christian church land. This bill affected the Catholics' land, the Orientals' land, and even Protestant groups in the area like the Anglican Church. The churches knew they were in real danger, and as such, they had to resort to drastic measures. To refresh our memory, millions of Christians go to Jerusalem every year to visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and other areas in the region. These people are called pilgrims, as they are in Jerusalem on pilgrimages to holy sites. Pilgrims bring with them a lot of economic growth to Israel. They need beds to sleep in and food to eat after all. The three Christian groups know this, and when circumstances become extremely dire, they can attempt to use this fact to their advantage. So the church leaders, in protest of both the aforementioned back tax attempts and the Bill of Church Lands, closed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This was a heavy decision for the Christians. It's not right to close the gates and cut Christians off from access to the tomb. But they knew that Israel knew the potential economic ramifications of such a decision. No money from Christian pilgrims would bode poorly for Israel. After all, over 85% of the tourists visiting the Holy Land were Christian pilgrims. And so, just 3 days into the closing of the Holy Sepulchre, Israeli authorities froze both the tax measures and the legislation, committing to a dialogue with the Christians over the issues. At the time, PM Benjamin Netanyahu appointed an Israeli minister named Tzachi Hanegbi to head a new committee to deal with this matter, and assured the churches that, quote, during the work of Minister Hanegbi on this subject, all legislation shall be suspended, end quote. On July 3rd of that same year, Netanyahu personally reiterated assurances to church leaders that such legislation would be halted. Though this bill was shelved at the time and Israel made a commitment to have real conversations with Christians, it was seemingly just talk, because later that same year, on October 18, 2018, the bill was reintroduced in essentially the exact same form by the exact same people. The next day, on October 19th, the three major Holy Land churches called on PM Netanyahu to block the draft legislation that was aimed at expropriating their property. In a letter to Netanyahu, the heads of the Orthodox, Catholic, and Oriental churches in Jerusalem condemned the bill as disgraceful. They expressed shock that the scandalous legislation appeared to be going ahead. They said, quote, "We were astonished to realize that this disgraceful bill was listed on the agenda of the Ministerial Committee for Legislation this coming Sunday." End quote. They once again appealed to PM Netanyahu and asked him to stop the bill once and for all. Israel then again postponed discussions on the bill. Rachel Azaria, the head sponsor of the bill, went on to say that church leaders misinterpreted it. Right. On every eve of Pascha, known in the West as Easter, the Patriarch Theophilos takes part in a tradition that goes back to the 4th century. He kneels in reverence within the dim chapel in the center of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Before him lies the marble slab upon which Christ himself lay during his burial. Outside, a sea of faithful wait in hushed anticipation. Then, in a moment beyond human understanding, a divine light bursts forth. Holy fire, not of earth, but a radiant gift from God himself. With reverence, the patriarch emerges with bundles of candles in each hand. The gathered multitude erupts in joy, their faces aglow with the miracle before them, as Jerusalem once more bears witness to the unbroken wonder of God's grace, as the fire spreads through the crowd and then the world. A joyous and momentous occasion for Orthodox Christians for hundreds of years, and one which saw thousands of attendees, with faithful pouring out onto the street surrounding the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. In 2020, this sacred ceremony was curtailed by a foreign actor, the Israeli government. In the narrow cobbled alleyways of the Christian quarter, tens of thousands of pilgrims would gather for the Holy Fire miracle ceremony. However, as the coronavirus pandemic hit, a perfect justification for the ceasing of the ceremony was found. The government forbade the church from inviting pilgrims from all over the world to attend the ceremony, as the Orthodox Church had been doing for hundreds upon hundreds of years. And in 2020, only the patriarch and vital clergymen and acolytes were present to witness the miracle. This was devastating for the Orthodox community, but not unprecedented for the time. In fact, during the COVID-19 lockdowns, Many Orthodox communities across the world were forbidden to conduct religious ceremonies. Further, even many Orthodox countries forbade or significantly restricted their own nation's churches from conducting their religious ceremonies. So perhaps the state of Israel was just following what was said to be the safest measure at the time. Perhaps they were avoiding a potential super spreader event, as many other countries purported to be doing during the lockdowns. So, if that were truly the case, these restrictions would have been lifted soon after, as most of the world began ending lockdowns between May and July 2020, with further easing in 2021 as vaccines became widely available. However, certain countries were faster to lift restrictions than others. Israel specifically had a few waves of lockdowns that reached into 2021, with the final restrictions disappearing around March of that year. Even though that was the case, on May 1st, 2021, the night before Easter and around 2 months after restrictions fully lifted in Israel, the Holy Fire ceremony was still capped as part of measures against COVID-19. Israeli authorities did not allow delegations from foreign Orthodox churches to come to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to receive the flame. Israel insisted that these were necessary precautions due to the fears that such a large gathering of people was still opening up the public to a potential superspreader event. However, this was clearly not a consistently upheld position for the Israeli government. Just 2 short days before the Holy Fire ceremony on April 30th, 2021, a Jewish holiday known as Lag BaOmer took place. During Lag BaOmer, it was tradition to take an annual pilgrimage to the tomb of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. A week before the 2021 festival, government departments limited the gathering to up to 10,000 people on the site. It should be noted how much larger that this is than the amount sanctioned for the Holy Fire ceremony. And though they gave this decree, they did nothing to enforce it, unlike with the Holy Fire ceremony. So that very year, the same year where the Holy Fire ceremony was capped due to COVID concerns, 100,000 people were in attendance for Lag BaOmer. The Israeli government did nothing to cap the attendance of this event. No police presence or blockades, nothing of the sort. Keep in mind that the Holy Fire ceremony usually invited a comparatively small 10,000 people within and just outside of the Holy Sepulchre. And when it came to Christians 2 days later, 2,000 policemen were immediately called to stop the pilgrims desiring to enter. The difference in response is obvious. Even more disastrous was the lack of proper oversight at the Lag BaOmer ceremony. A deadly pileup occurred at the only exit from the tomb's area, resulting in the deaths of 45 men and boys and injuring around 150 others, many of them critically. It became the deadliest civilian disaster in the history of the State of Israel. In 2022, the local Orthodox Christians, seeing the world open back up, excitedly began preparing to once more perform the ceremony with over 10,000 pilgrims, as they had always done. Pilgrims rushed to the Holy Land for the Holy Fire ceremony, only to face Israel's heavy-handed restrictions. Despite years of safely accommodating far larger crowds, Israeli police arbitrarily slashed attendance to just 1,800 people, including 200 police officers, purportedly for safety concerns. They had upheld that due to the Lag BaOmer disaster last year, events of such magnitude could no longer happen in Israel, that their desire was simply to uphold safety. But again, the Lag BaOmer event in 2022 drew around 20,000 attendees, fewer than in previous years, but still more than 10 times the number of participants permitted at the Orthodox Christian Holy Fire ceremony. The local police force stood before the Christians barring entry, sparking violent clashes. The Orthodox Christian Patriarchate lambasted the restrictions as a hindrance to religious freedom and called on all worshippers to flood the church despite Israeli warnings. As Christians attempted entry into the Old City's Christian quarter to attend services, more than 2,000 police officers swarmed the region, keeping pilgrims out. So much for that attendance cap. Church officials denounced the move, accusing authorities of fabricating safety concerns to justify their crackdown. However, 3 years later, nothing has changed. Excuse after excuse, year after year, to cap the Holy Fire ceremony. In 2023, the same safety concerns were upheld as justification. However, that same year, The Lag BaOmer event once more saw over 100,000 celebrants. In the last 2 years, the conflict between Israel and Palestine has been cited as the reason for the limitations of the Holy Fire ceremony, and these restrictions show no signs of stopping. This is a photo showing an activity Christians in Jerusalem have become all too familiar with: settler squatting. These settlers are squatting on church property, specifically Greek Orthodox property on Mount Zion. That's right, the same Mount Zion where the holy righteous prophet David brought the Ark of the Covenant to 3,000 years ago. The same mountain where Christ dined with his apostles during the Last Supper, and where the Holy Spirit descended upon the apostles during Pentecost. These settlers were squatting on church property in this most holy place. But why? Settlers commonly practice this process, sometimes called adverse possession, illegally squatting in a location they did not own, only to turn it into a legal battle and for the Israeli courts to side with the squatters and sign the location over to the settlers. For example, in the early hours of a day like any other in 2016, an incident unfolded at the Metochion of Gethsemane, a small but significant chapel within the courtyard of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This chapel, closely tied to the Church of Dormition, plays an important role in the annual procession of the icon of the Theotokos during the Feast of the Dormition. That morning, a group of settlers broke into the chapel, using sledgehammers to damage the walls before installing iron bars in an attempt to take control of the property. The Greek Orthodox Church quickly alerted the police, who eventually arrived to halt the intrusion. However, the legal battle was just beginning. The church was forced to fight for its property rights in court, as the settlers, undeterred, made a second attempt to seize the space. While this attempt was clearly too brash to succeed, this incident reflects a larger pattern of ludicrous property takeovers in the Old City of Jerusalem, where religious and historical sites often become the center of legal and territorial struggles. While this particular attempt was stopped, it's a problem that these events happen in the first place or are at all legitimized by the courts. Like later on the 27th of December 2022, when Israeli settlers and police seized a plot of land owned by the Greek Orthodox Church in East Jerusalem. Dozens of settlers stormed this 5,000 square meter piece of land in the Palestinian Silwan neighborhood south of the Old City early in the morning. The settlers then fenced it off and installed surveillance cameras with the protection of the police. Local Palestinian residents rushed to the scene to stop the land confiscation, but were assaulted by the settlers and police, and 3 adolescent Palestinians were arrested as a result. Or even currently, where Jewish settlers are beginning to set up cameras outside of seminaries and on church property in Mount Zion, brashly displaying banners which seem to have the word Nitzakon written over and over again, which means victory in English. The message of these settlers is clear, and while these squatters have become an increasingly difficult issue to deal with, they were paltry compared to what the Jerusalem municipality's local committee for planning and construction was about to propose. On the 20th of February 2022, it was released by the Times of Israel that Jerusalem's municipality, in conjunction with the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, was advancing with Plan Number 101-067478 to expand the national park around the Old City walls by 68 acres. As written in Planned Expansion of National Park in Old City Basin to be discussed by local planning committee in early March, quote, "The plan proposes the national park land designation for areas on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, the Ben Hinnom Valley, and beyond to Abu Thor, the Kidron Valley, and Wadi al-Jaz, which includes privately owned Palestinian lands, and church-owned land encompassing some of the most important sites in Christianity." End quote. To better understand the region, Mount Zion and the Mount of Olives stand side by side, just east of Jerusalem's Old City. Between them lies the Kidron Valley, a historically rich area where many Palestinians live today. Stretching between and around these locations is the City of David National Park, an area claimed to preserve Jerusalem's ancient past. But in recent years, all 3 of these historic sites have faced increasing encroachment by settlers. Beneath the Kidron Valley, layers of buried history remain untouched, with some discoveries dating back to the earliest days of Jerusalem. This has spurred a wave of archaeological excavations, bringing with them intense controversy. Looking at the City of David Foundation's website, in their mission statement it is openly written, quote, "At the City of David Foundation, we are dedicated to revealing and preserving the birthplace of Jerusalem, transforming it into a premier national tourist center," end quote. It's quite strange that preserving appears right after revealing, when revealing entails the upending of the current condition of the area. Though the City of David is officially a national park, it is privately managed by the Elad Foundation, a Jewish settler organization that also funds much of the excavation work. As dig sites and park facilities expand down the slopes of the Kidron Valley, they increasingly encroach upon the homes and properties of Palestinian residents in the village of Silwan. This has ignited disputes over the true motivations behind these developments. In 2018, 75 Palestinian families, around 400 people, were under threat of eviction by the local municipality. According to the group Peace Now, these evictions were explicitly intended to make way for Israeli settlers. Meanwhile, a similarly contentious effort, the aforementioned Plan No. 674788, sought to appropriate Christian church property, with as many as 20 sites on the Mount of Olives at risk. Referring back to planned expansion, quote, "A portion of the area designated for the national park expansion is owned by the Franciscan, Greek, and Armenian Orthodox churches. Nearly 20 Christian sites, some of the most important to Christianity, are either in the area designated for the national park or are surrounded by it or adjacent to it on the slopes of the Mount of Olives. For example, the churches of Gethsemane, Mary Magdalene, and Dominus Flevit are sandwiched by the national park from the north and south and encompassed into a narrow strip of Christian presence. The Catholic cemetery in the Kidron Valley, together with a papal garden, is included within the bounds of the national park's expansion. However, when the planners wanted to include the Jewish cemetery nearby, the Jewish religious authorities managing the cemetery opposed it and prevented its inclusion. The religious divide, disregarding the independence of the Christian sites while avoiding the inclusion of Jewish sites, shows the clear systemic difference in the treatment of Christians when compared to the Israeli Jews. To put it into perspective, there are 20 church properties on just this one mountain. The Mount of Olives is such an important place for all Christians. The mountain is mentioned in the Gospel. There are Christian stewards who live on the mountain and take care of the churches there and welcome pilgrims. It's right outside the old city gates, where the Garden of Gethsemane and the tomb of the Virgin Mary are, and the place where Christ cried looking out to Jerusalem. So it's a very Christian area. On the other side, on Mount Zion, stands the Patriarchal School of Zion, an important Orthodox seminary, as well as other churches in the area. Given the spiritual importance of the region, what justification does the Jerusalem municipality provide for altering the organization of these buildings and this land's ownership? The plan's documents state that the expansion aims to, quote, "ensure the unique character of the area by preserving the site's historical, both religious and national, landscapes and architectural values," end quote. The documents likewise emphasize the importance of preserving the landscape around the Old City and protecting the visibility of the Old City walls. However, during the 60 years since the establishment of the State of Israel, the landscape that the plan refers to has hardly been harmed. In fact, the only harm that would come to the landscape would be if the Israelis went through with this national park border expansion plan, since the plan includes the construction of a massive 16,000 square meter Kedem compound, a planned 7-floor building which would act as a local archaeological museum, house lecture halls, classrooms, shops, and an underground parking lot. This massive project would be situated just 20 meters from the old city walls, annihilating both the ancient historic skyline as well as harming the character of Christian reverence the old city Christians wish to maintain. The Kedem compound has received necessary approvals for construction. However, many small controversies and pushback from various local groups have delayed full-blown construction. As well as the intrusive 7-story Kedem compound, the border expansion plan includes the construction of an elevated cable car that would span 1.4 kilometers and would move tourists through a few locations in the area. The first station in the Bacha neighborhood, continuing to Mount Zion, and finally ending at the yet-to-be-built Kedem compound near Dung Gate and the Western Wall. As of May 2022, Israel's High Court approved the cable car project, dismissing petitions against it. However, the project continues to face opposition from various groups, including environmental organizations, architects, and local Palestinian communities, who are concerned about its implications on the city's cultural heritage and social fabric. Clearly, the justification that the municipality was using for this border expansion plan, landscape preservation, was a total farce. Just like in 2015, the Orthodox Patriarchate was not informed of the plan to forcefully acquire its church properties, nor were the Catholic or Oriental churches. They learned of it as the general public did, through the media. There was no attempt to make a deal or come to a compromise or agreement before anything was officially decided and declared. The three Christian groups once more offered a joint letter of concern to one of the headrunners of the project, saying, quote, "We, the heads of the churches in the Holy Land, write to you to express our gravest concern and unequivocal objection to Plan Number 101-06747888, advanced by the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, for the designation and subsequent declaration of large spaces of the Mount of Olives in the Holy City of Jerusalem as a national park." The Mount of Olives is one of the holiest sites for Christianity. It hosts some of the most important shrines for Christians, which, outside of the necessary pandemic restrictions, are visited by millions of pilgrims every year. Our churches work to relentlessly preserve the sacred character of the mountain and its accessibility to pilgrims and visitors. In recent years, we cannot help but feel that various entities are seeking to minimize, not to say eliminate, any non-Jewish characteristics of the holy city by attempting to alter the status quo in this holy mountain. They have failed due to the objection and lack of cooperation from the churches. After their attempts failed, they resorted to statutory powers by advancing a plan to declare vast parts of the mountain as a national park. Although the plan is officially presented by the INPA, it seems that it was put forward and is being orchestrated, advanced, and promoted by entities whose apparent sole purpose is to confiscate and nationalize one of the holiest sites for Christianity and alter its nature. End quote. This letter was signed by the Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem, Theophilos III, the Roman Catholic Custos of the Holy Land, Francesco Paton of the Franciscan Order, and the Armenian Patriarch of Jerusalem, Norhan Manogian. It seemed that all three groups were confident in suggesting that there was a coordinated effort by anti-Christian actors to undermine the Christian presence in Jerusalem. Ateret Kohanim is an Israel Jewish organization located in the Old City of Jerusalem, an organization whose mission statement blatantly states, quote, "Ateret Kohanim works to redeem property once held by Jews in Israel's capital, as well as re-establishing Jewish neighborhoods in the heart of the Old City and its surrounding areas," end quote. Keeping in mind the fact that Jews hadn't held any substantial property in the region since the 2nd century, it's quite a strange statement to proudly proclaim, especially when it involves the destruction and displacement of communities that had been there for hundreds upon hundreds of years. The organization is led by Matetayu Dan, a radical Jewish ideologue who believes in acquiring property in the Old City from those who live there by any means necessary. His tactics include offering sexual services from non-Jewish women, blackmail, and coercion. He and his organization have close ties with those in the Israeli cabinet, members of the Knesset, and the local governing administration in Jerusalem. Ateret Kohanim was the center of one of the largest scandals in the Orthodox Church of Jerusalem in this century. The Jaffa Gate case. The Jaffa Gate scandal began in 2005 with a supposedly legitimate sale of 3 Orthodox church properties to Ateret Kohanim by Patriarch Irenaeus I. This scandal eventually led to the deposition of the then Patriarch, and on August 22, 2005, Theophilos, the former Archbishop of Tabor, was elected as the 141st Patriarch of Jerusalem. However, the true nature of this event was repeatedly misrepresented by many bad actors, with deeper layers of deception concealed just beneath the surface. Before we continue, it should be said, both of these patriarchs have been lied about. Both of these patriarchs have been slandered, and this is a very delicate issue. I will try to be as unbiased as I can using the information I have acquired. That being said, let's continue. Upon assuming office, His Beatitude Patriarch Theophilos III immediately initiated legal procedures in Israeli courts to cancel the sale of buildings Patriarch Irenaeus was accused of selling, and the new patriarch revealed the truth. In reality, the former patriarch hadn't sold any property at all. His Beatitude Theophilos proved that the sales had not been approved by either Patriarch Irenaeus or the Holy Synod, both of whom, under church bylaws, must approve all property transactions, confirming immediately that the deal was completely illegitimate. Further investigations revealed that Ateret Kohanim had orchestrated the entire scheme through bribery and deception, exploiting a previously unknown bad actor within the church's administration to push through fraudulent transactions, Nicholas Papadimos. With these unlawful transactions, Ateret Kohanim would take control of these properties through 99-year virtual ownership lease agreements, which were generously structured to be renewable for an additional 99 years, effectively amounting to a sale. As the case progressed, more evidence of Ateret Kohanim's financial misconduct surfaced. A recording from the trial captured a conversation between Mati Dan and Nicholas Papadimos, in which Dan confirmed that financial bribes had been made as part of the property deal. Further revelations exposed that Ateret Kohanim had discreetly issued a $10,000 cash bribe to him years after the unlawful transaction, reinforcing the fraudulent and corrupt nature of the agreement. The Patriarchate's attorneys also stressed that Don didn't come to court to explain matters, a telling sign of the group's complicity in the deceptive maneuvering that led to the unauthorized transfer of church properties. Further, it was also said that the price for the buildings by Ateret Kohanim was significantly lower than their market value. According to court documents, front companies called Beresford Investments Limited, Richards Marketing Corporation, and Gallo Global Limited signed agreements with the Greek Orthodox Church in 2004 to pay just $1,250,000 for the lease to the Hotel Imperial, $500,000 for the lease to the Petra Hotel, located between the Jaffa Gate and the Old City's Palestinian Market, and $55,000 to lease a third property called the Muzamia House in the Christian court. Mati Dan himself was quoted saying that the Petra Hotel alone was worth $100 million. Even assuming he was greatly over-exaggerating, Dan clearly knew this building was worth far more than $500,000. And yet, Ateret Kohanim submitted an assessment valuing the hotel at just 1.2 million shekels, or $350,000, which convinced the district court the $500,000 price was reasonable. These were historic locations for the church. The Imperial Hotel was built in the 19th century by the Greek Orthodox Church to shelter pilgrims arriving in Jerusalem. It was the grandest hotel in Jerusalem in its day. It was even featured in photographs taken during the visit of Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II to the city in 1898. Similarly, the Petra Hotel was acquired by the church in the late 1920s, both of these locations aiding the financially struggling church to stay afloat. Regardless of all of this, in June 2022, despite much evidence of corruption, deception, fraud, and protests from both Christian and Muslim Palestinians, Israel's Supreme Court somehow ruled that Ateret Kohanim had purchased the properties legally and legitimately, and that these three Orthodox Church properties in Jerusalem's Old City now legally belong to them. The recent outbreak of war between the Israelis and Palestinians beginning on October 7, 2023, has delayed any sort of permanent reorganization of the acquired properties, and as of right now, Ateret Kohanim has done nothing with these church properties. However, once they do, the change it will make to the Old City may be dire. As mentioned before, Ateret Kohanim, as an organization, proclaims themselves to be the redeemers of Jerusalem from non-Jews. They openly proclaim their desire to rid the region of indigenous Palestinian Muslim and Christian populations in their entirety. Naturally, as Ateret Kohanim markets themselves this way, their consumer base would have similar ideological viewpoints, meaning the Jews who would potentially move into these newly reconstructed properties would likely have similar desires. One could only imagine the next steps when those types of people move into the old city in greater numbers. Even more intimidation, more squatting, more havoc. These people have been known to carry guns around. They've been known to harass priests, spit and curse at them. Christians living in the region committing the unforgivable crime of simply practicing Christianity would be in even more danger. The Imperial and Petra hotels exist right near the Christian quarter. Processions are frequently done on the adjacent streets. Clashes between ultra-nationalist Jews and devout Christians could spell disaster for the Orthodox, Catholic, Oriental, and Protestant faithful. Whether squatting, forced government initiatives, or strange business practices, the Orthodox Church and all the churches in the heart of Jerusalem have faced much strife when it comes to their properties in Israel. Interestingly enough, there was a similar story in a different church. In 2021, an Armenian priest, Barat Yeretsain, signed a fraudulent deal leasing an Oriental Orthodox-owned lot, which was around 25% of the old city's Armenian quarter, referred to as Cow's Garden, for up to 98 years to a company called Zana Capital, a company which was registered just before the agreement was signed by an Australian-Israeli businessman, Danny Rothman, who also goes by Danny Rubenstein. There is very little information available about Rothman, but he was fined for falsifying his academic background in 2016, according to a Cyprus regulatory decision. Zana Capital then turned over half the shares to a local Israeli businessman, George Warwar, a man who has been involved in various criminal offenses according to court filings, including a 24-month prison sentence for armed robbery, and has declared bankruptcy in the past. It was revealed that Warwar bribed the priest and that the two had sustained various inappropriate connections. The priest was deposed, assaulted by a mob of angry young Armenians, and whisked away by Israeli police before seeking refuge in Southern California. The Armenian Patriarchate canceled the deal in October of 2024, but Zana fought back in court, and the two are now in mediation over the contract. The Christians say that Warwar has the backing of a prominent settler organization seeking to expand Jewish presence in Jerusalem's Old City. This organization, of course, being Atret Kohanim, as Atret Kohanim's leaders were photographed meeting with both Warwar and Danny Rothman, though Atret Kohanim denies this connection. Rothman himself has refused to comment on the situation. The Armenians feel disheartened. In an attempt to stop any development on this fraudulently acquired land, some residents of the Armenian quarter have camped out at Cow's Garden in a structure with reinforced plywood walls to protest the illegal land grab. They've been painted as anti-Semitic squatters by Zana Capital. On November 15th of 2024, the company sent armed men to the lot. They began attacking those held up there, including clergymen, with pepper spray and batons. Though Armenians began arriving in the Old City as early as the 4th century, the majority of Armenians arrived in Jerusalem after being driven out of the Ottoman Empire during the Armenian Genocide. Now, this land is being stolen away from them. A local resident, Setrag Balian, was quoted saying, "Our lands were acquired inch by inch, with blood and sweat. With one signature, they were given away." Bills, taxes, police abuse, settler movements, the municipalities. Piece by piece, an apparatus is taking shape in Israel, a network of tools and mechanisms, each with its own function, all aimed in a single direction. This apparatus is turning against Christianity. What was once a rocky but peaceful status quo, a mosaic of faiths and communities layered over centuries, is being upended. A new climate is forming, one increasingly hostile to the Christian presence in the Holy Land. And in this climate, the danger is clear that this living, beautiful, vibrant community will vanish, that the churches will remain only as a memory, their buildings intact, their spirit gone, nothing but a museum. That is not what the church is, and that is not what the holy sites are for. If they are no longer places of prayer and worship, then they are nothing but stones, stones with no purpose. And that would be a tragedy, not only for Christians, but for the soul of the Holy Land. And yet, this was only the beginning. Since Israel's new government, the 6th Netanyahu cabinet, the most right-wing and religious in the country's history, was elected by Israel's strongly right-leaning Jewish electorate, incidents against Christians in Jerusalem have become more frequent and more violent. To avoid confusion, it's important to define what is meant by the ultra or far right wing in the context of Israeli Jews. These groups often advocate for a Jewish theocratic state in place of a democratic one. Some seek to have halakha, or Jewish religious law, guide the laws of the state. Non-Jews, particularly Palestinians, Arabs, and Christians, are often viewed not as equal citizens, but as unwanted guests. Many support full Jewish sovereignty over all historic biblical lands, including the West Bank, which was historically Judea and Samaria, and in more extreme cases, even parts of Jordan or beyond. Some factions even explicitly call for the elimination of Christianity and Islam in Israel. In certain circles, there is also belief that the rebuilding of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem and ridding Israel of all non-Jews are necessary precursors to the coming of the Jewish Messiah. It is essential to note, however, that these views are not representative of all Jews in Israel. While it is true that right-wing political identification has grown significantly, from 46% of Jewish voters in 2019 to over 60% in the 2022 election cycle, according to the Israel Democracy Institute, this shift does not mean that all those identifying as right-wing embrace the full set of ultranationalistic or religious extremist views described before. Nevertheless, the rise in right-wing alignment suggests at least some ideological overlap with elements of the ultra-right. Against this political backdrop, reports of anti-Christian harassment have surged. While such hostility was not uncommon in the past, the frequency and intensity of these incidents have noticeably grown. Multiple accounts from church leaders, clergy, and watchdog organizations document a rising pattern of aggression, desecration, and intimidation targeting the Christian community in Jerusalem and beyond. This rise in anti-Christian incidents comes as Israeli settlers, encouraged by their supporters in the government, seem to be taking advantage of the moment to further grow their presence in the Old City. On January 1st, 2023, 3 days after the election of the new administration, 30 Christian graves at the Episcopal Church's Mount Zion Cemetery were desecrated. The church's statement read, quote, "They purposely and relentlessly smashed to pieces more than 30 gravestones, many of them historic. Security camera footage later revealed that these crimes took place beginning around 3:20 p.m. on January 1st, and that the perpetrators, numbered at least 2, were both young males wearing kippahs and talit katans," end quote. While kippahs are more commonplace amongst different Jewish groups, talit katans are known to be worn usually by Orthodox Jews. To make the distinction clear going forward, Orthodox Jews have no connection to Orthodox Christians or Oriental Orthodox Christians besides the shared term Orthodox. The Episcopal Church's statement then continued to welcome the supportive words expressed by Israel's previous president Herzog, as well as a few other notable members of the Israeli government. Thankfully, the 2 extremist assailants were at least put under house arrest. However, there were issues with this response as well. To bring a comparison, if 2 Christian men in the United States conspired to desecrate 28 Jewish graves out of a hatred for the Jewish faith, they would likely face serious felony charges, including aggravated cemetery desecration, hate crime charges, criminal conspiracy, and vandalism. Technically speaking, these charges could add up to around 130 years in prison for this many counts of grave desecration in one night, but one could realistically expect a final sentence of 15 to 25 years in prison. Now, as said before, laws in one country don't beget laws in another country, but the difference is quite clear. As, in stark contrast, when these 2 Jewish youths in Israel were caught on camera desecrating 28 Christian graves at the Protestant cemetery on Mount Zion, they were arrested but only temporarily placed under house arrest, with no known criminal trial or prison time. It shows how lightly anti-Christian hate crimes are taken in Israel, particularly when the perpetrators are Jewish. And this relative apathy towards persecuting anti-Christian hate crime perpetrators would lead to even more problems for Christians in Israel. This text reads, Mot Lenatzrim, which in English means Death to Christians. Less than 2 weeks after the graveyard vandalization incident, on January 12th, Jewish extremists wrote hate slogans in Hebrew on the walls of the Armenian Orthodox Patriarchate in the Old City of Jerusalem and the Armenian Monastery of Saint Saviour, calling for death to Christians and Armenians. Other vandalized areas of the walls read "Revenge" and "Death to Arabs and Gentiles." The perpetrators were never pursued. Revenge might suggest that this was a price tag crime. These are acts committed to exact a price from local Palestinians, Arabs, Christians, and other minority groups as retribution for any action taken against settlement enterprise. The same could likely be said about other events during the next couple of weeks, such as when Oriental Orthodox funeral notices were ripped down by Jewish girls passing outside the Armenian convent in Jerusalem because they had crosses on them, or when a Jewish man was caught urinating at the entrance to the convent while passing by the same evening. All of these events took place within just a 10-day span, and in each case, the local police failed to investigate or pursue the perpetrators. In 2023, the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue, an Israeli nonprofit organization that focuses on fostering understanding, dialogue, and shared society among different religious and ethnic communities in Israel, published their first annual report on anti-Christian attacks in Israel. A breakdown of these events revealed staggering statistics. It should be noted that this report almost certainly did not nearly cover the entirety of anti-Christian discrimination in Israel, as many events are not reported. In total, the number of anti-Christian incidents that were documented were over 80, including 16 incidents of physical attacks, like on January 28th, when Armenian Christians were pepper sprayed, or on March 19th, when 2 radical Israeli men entered the Orthodox Christian Church of Gethsemane in East Jerusalem, where the tomb of the Virgin Mary lies, and physically attacked a bishop and 2 priests with a metal rod as they were taking part in a religious service, all while attempting to deface items in the church. According to eyewitnesses quoted by the press, the attackers were wearing kippahs and ritual fringes worn by observant Jews. The 2 men were caught and held by the people present until the police arrived and took the men away. However, police reports later only mentioned one assailant, a 27-year-old citizen of Israel of Moldovan descent who was arrested. The case was closed after the man was declared mentally ill and wasn't jailed. There were 12 incidents of verbal harassment and intimidation, like when on August 29th, 2 young religious Jewish men shouted and aggressively pushed a group of Christian Indian pilgrims who were visiting the tomb of King David, or on September 11th, in the Jewish quarter of the Old City, when 2 Christian women were surrounded and harassed by a group of Jewish religious youth. The Jewish teenagers pulled the women's backpacks, yelled and insulted them, hit them, and threw things at them. The harassment only ended when Jewish adults approached the Christian women and told them to leave. Over 25 incidents of spitting at Christians, repeatedly spitting during Orthodox Christian, Oriental Orthodox, and Roman Catholic processions, as well as Jewish radicals spitting at priests, nuns, pilgrims, churches, and crosses, especially near Jaffa Gate, the Armenian Quarter, and the Roman Catholic Church of the Flagellation.
האם זה בסדר לירוק על נוצרים?
עליהם ממש? לא יודע, אני יורק על הרצפה, אולי אם אני רואה צלב, אם אני רואה נוצרי...
אתה כן?
אני יורק על הרצפה.
למה אתה יורק?
רגע, הוא אמר...
זה מגעיל אותי.
לא, על איפה רואה צלב.
הוא לא יורק עליהם.
לא, ברור.
על
הרצפה, הבנתי. אבל אתה יורק על הרצפה שאתה רואה צלב?
משהו שמגעיל, אני יורק.
אוקיי. ועליהם לא?
לא.
ולמה? מה הסיבה לתופעה הזאת? מאיפה זה...
זה מגעיל אותי.
למה? תסביר.
למה? כי נצרות זה משהו זה נגד היהודים, מה שהנוצרים עשו ליהודים. הם בכלל הנצרות זה משהו שנוגד.
Around 10 examples of vandalism and graffiti, including the aforementioned desecration of the Episcopalian graves, as well as the death to Christians defacement at the Armenian monastery of Saint Saviour, 5 incidents of religious access restrictions, 8 incidents of police misconduct or inaction, and 4 incidents of obscene acts and desecration, like the aforementioned urination upon holy sites. A great majority of these crimes went unpunished. No effort has been made by the police or the government to deter such acts despite their forced increased presence for supposed safety concerns during so many religious festivals. while many other perpetrators are simply declared mentally ill, thereby making them unpunishable. The Bishop Emeritus of the Evangelical Lutheran Church, Minib Yonan, would say, quote, "My fear is that these perpetrators are known, but they enjoy impunity. That's the reason they are doing this." End quote. This increase in hostility was noticed by all the Christian groups in the Holy Land. According to the aforementioned Custos of the Holy Land, Pier Battista Pisaballa, who had now become the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, quote, "The frequency of these attacks, the aggressions, has become something new. These people feel they are protected, that the cultural and political atmosphere can now justify or tolerate actions against Christians." End quote. Meanwhile, Father Don Binder of St. George's Anglican Cathedral said, quote, "The right-wing elements are out to Judaize the old city and the other lands, and we feel nothing is holding them back now." End quote. Similarly, His Beatitude, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Theophilus III, said, quote, "Their mind is obsessed with the messianic syndrome. They want to take over the whole land. When you see young people, 15 or 16 years old, and they do all sorts of things and they're not afraid, someone is behind it." End quote. It seems all of Christendom is in agreement. The situation in Israel is becoming worse, and those who wish to destroy Christianity are being protected. According to the Orthodox Christian Patriarch and many other leaders in the local Christian denominations, there seems to be an apparatus behind these increased attacks, and there are many potential culprits. For example, extremist groups like the Hilltop Youth, or Lahava, who consider Christians to be enemies of the Jewish people. Mayor Edinger heads the Hilltop Youth, and they are a radical group responsible for an arson attack on the Roman Catholic Church of the Multiplication of the Loaves and Fishes on the 17th of July 2015. Similarly, in a 2015 essay, Lahava founder Bensi Gopstein called Christians blood-sucking vampires and claimed that Christians have spent billions of dollars to disseminate spiritual poison in Israel. Quote, "Missionary work must not be given a foothold. Let's throw the vampires out of our land before they drink our blood again." End quote. Gopstein is a close associate and friend of the current Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, another far-right-wing nationalist. Itamar himself was previously known for being a lawyer that defended Jews accused of Jewish extremist terrorism on trial in Israel. When such individuals are the highest ranks in the Israeli government, it's no wonder these organizations, and further, the individuals within them, are emboldened to attack Christians. On top of this, though they are extremist groups, these are not paltry organizations. Hilltop Youth has around 5,000 ideological followers, while Lahava has around 10,000 registered members, with chapters in every state in Israel. It's incredibly likely that these groups, which in certain cases face no discouragement from the newly elected Israeli government, are the perpetrators of many of these anti-Christian hate crimes. They know that they won't get into trouble for it. At worst, they'd be jailed at the scene, only to be released later that day. They're more emboldened to act against Christians. Just the reported numbers show the change. According to the Israeli Incitement Discrimination Against Palestinian Christians report, in 2021, there were just 3 reported anti-Christian crimes. In 2022, 6 reported anti-Christian crimes. After the election of the new government in 2023, more than 80. And last year in 2024, there were 111 reported cases of anti-Christian hate crimes, according to the 2024 annual report by the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue. Around 2 per week or every 3 days. Keeping in mind that these reports can't keep track of the additional unreported crimes, it paints a nasty picture for the position of Christians in Israel. With all that the Christians had gone through in only the last decade, they felt tired of constantly fighting for the right to simply exist. And then, the recent outbreak of conflict between Israel and Palestine beginning on October 7, 2023, has been covered extensively by both pro-Palestine and pro-Israel sources. This video solely seeks to cover the injustices against the church populations in Israel. Therefore, this video won't focus on the greater war in general. However, the endless and mindless killings of the Palestinian men, women, and children is extremely tragic. And don't think, just because this video doesn't cover it extensively, that somehow the murder of tens of thousands of innocent Muslims is justified in my eyes. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble, generations of families wiped out in moments, and basic human dignity stripped away under the weight of relentless violence. As of the writing of this portion of the script, on April 10, 2025, the Palestinian death toll from the Israeli onslaught since October 2023 has risen to 50,886 documented fatalities, with an additional 115,875 individuals sustaining injuries. The majority of the victims are women and children. The Ministry of Health in Gaza has released a 1,516-page document listing the names of over 50,000 Palestinians confirmed killed in Gaza. Of over 50,000 Palestinians confirmed to have been killed in Gaza since October 7, 2023. There are a total of 474 pages of this document listing 15,600 children's names. 876 children were less than 1 year old. 4,110 were 1 to 5 years old. 5,745 were between the ages of 6 and 12. Lastly, 4,882 were 13 to less than 18 years old. 274 babies were born and killed during Israel's war in Gaza. The night before the report was released, the former President Joe Biden said,
"I'm sure innocents have been killed, and it's the price of waging a war, but I have no confidence in the number that the Palestinians are using."
Israel's onslaught continues undeterred despite calls from the United Nations Security Council for an immediate ceasefire and directives from the International Court of Justice urging measures to prevent genocide and alleviate the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. No matter what position someone holds on the justification of either side of the war, there is no argument that can be made for why 51,000 civilians, including 15,000 children, deserve to die, and 120,000 civilians deserve to be injured. Most individuals that attempt to justify the slaughter of the Palestinian people do so by dehumanizing them, suggesting that they're all Hamas agents who deserve to die, even the babies and toddlers. Others say that they deserve to die simply because they are Muslim. Another opinion that's quite popular is that the Palestinian civilians have brought this upon themselves for their fighting against Israel, though the Israelis are the invaders and quite frequently the aggressors. Some express the sentiment that it would be better if the Muslims and Jews wiped each other out. And throughout all of this, there's one small group that is usually glanced over: the Christians.
نمجد قيامته ذات ثلاثية الأيام. نسجد لقيامة المسيح ذات ثلاثية الأيام. المسيح قام بين الأموات وداس الموت بالموت وهب الحياة للذين في القبور. حتى قام الرب.
The Christian community in the Gaza Strip is not incredibly large, and it has experienced a significant decline over the years. In 2022, approximately 1,100 Christians resided in Gaza, a decrease from about 3,000 in 2009. The majority of these Christians are affiliated with the Greek Orthodox Church, accounting for roughly 89% of the Christian population, around 1,000 people. Roman Catholics represent approximately 9.3%, or 90 people, while the remaining 1.7%, or 20, belong to various Protestant denominations, including Baptists and other evangelical groups. The area has only 3 churches: the Orthodox Christian Church of St. Porphyrius, which is the 3rd oldest standing church, the Roman Catholic Holy Family Church, which also houses the Sisters of Mother Teresa Convent and Missionaries of Charity, and the Gaza Baptist Church, which still stands but has limited activity due to lack of parishioners and safety. So yes, it's a tiny community, just 1,000 Orthodox Christians, 100 Catholics, and 20 Protestants in an area of 2.2 million. But even still, they are being killed. According to the Patriarch Theophilus III, the number of Christians has been reduced to less than 600 since the start of the war. 40% of all Christians in Gaza have been killed. Late on October 12th, Israel's military ordered the evacuation of the northern end of the Gaza Strip territory, including Gaza City, as a precursor to sending in soldiers to neutralize Hamas. 5 days later, just 10 days into the conflict, Israel bombed the courtyard of the Al-Ali Baptist Hospital, killing 471 people and wounding 342 others upon impact. This hospital was managed by the Episcopal Church in Jerusalem. Founded in 1882, it was one of the oldest hospitals in the city, and it served as a target for the IDF to slaughter. In response to the attack, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, pleaded for, quote, the evacuation order on hospitals in northern Gaza to be reversed, and for health facilities, health workers, patients, and civilians to be protected, end quote. This might seem obvious to some, but those in hospitals are not usually in a position to be transported. At the time, Israel pursued a narrative that it was in fact Hamas who had bombed the hospitals through a misfire. This narrative was further spread by many news institutions, including the Associated Press, CNN, The Guardian, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, and others. However, in their investigation on the 20th of October of 2023, London-based research group Forensic Architecture concluded that the blast was the result of a munition fired from the direction of Israel. And in a joint letter written by the three patriarchal heads, they attributed the blame to Israel and condemned the behavior as well as the denial of culpability. You may be the judge of which narrative you believe, though the tragedies weren't over. Just 2 days after the Al-Ali hospital bombing, the St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church complex was bombed. The church is considered the third oldest standing church in the world, as it was first constructed on the site in the 5th century. It's named after St. Porphyrius, the bishop of Palestine, from 395 to 420 AD. The saint who first succeeded in freeing Gaza from paganism, and the very saint who had built the original church on the site. A 2-story building belonging to the church, on church property, and sheltering refugees collapsed as a result of the bombing. Over 450 Christian and Muslim Palestinian residents of the Gaza Strip had been seeking refuge there for safety. The attack killed 18 Christians and injured many others. 16 of the victims were Orthodox Christian, and several victims were part of the Employment Generation Project for Christian Youth, run by the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem. The Israeli Defense Force put out a statement saying that their fighter jets had struck a nearby Hamas militant center that was used to stage attacks on Israel, but denied that St. Porphyrius had been their target. They also underplayed the attack, stating, quote, as a result of the IDF strike, a wall of a church in the area was damaged, end quote. However, it was the church compound that was bombed, not some adjacent site, and 18 people surely were not seeking shelter inside of a wall, so that clearly couldn't have been the only damage. The 2-story building that was demolished was not a wall, and as of now, no evidence has ever been presented to confirm the existence of the aforementioned Hamas control center. The attack was condemned by the heads of the local churches. His Beatitude Theophilus III gave his strongest condemnation of the actions undertaken by Israel and the IDF, calling it a war crime, and rightfully so. He also expressed his deepest sympathies for the victims of the bombing, adding that the church would not heed Israel's warnings to leave the area as Israel continues to carry out airstrikes, and would instead continue to fulfill its religious and moral duty in providing assistance, support, and refuge to those in need. Orthodox across the world were outraged at the bombing, many even calling the reposed Orthodox Christians martyrs for the faith, killed for orthodoxy. They were commemorated and prayed for across the globe. In 2020, the Arab Orthodox Cultural Center, an Orthodox Christian school in Tel Al-Hawa, was inaugurated. It had been in construction since 1992, a difficult initiative for the financially struggling church, but an initiative she undertook nevertheless. The center was a jewel among the Christian institutions in Gaza. It was open to the entire local community, regardless of creed. It offered a safe place for people to gather, especially young people, to receive education and skills training, practice sports, organize conferences, and hold celebrations. On the 28th of October, Israeli forces called the director of the cultural center, ordering them to leave the building. 3,000 civilians had been seeking refuge there during this war. The center complied, fearing the worst. Then on the 30th of October, the IDF launched airstrikes upon the Orthodox Cultural Center, completely flattening the complex. Thankfully, no casualties were reported, and the evacuation 2 days prior had been successful. However, everything that the cultural center had worked to achieve in the last 32 years was destroyed. The building itself and all of the center's possessions inside of it. The Orthodox Christian Patriarchate, Catholic Patriarchate, Oriental Patriarchate, local Protestant bishops, and further a growing group of world leaders began pleading for a ceasefire. But PM Netanyahu rejected all growing calls for such a resolution, saying it would be a surrender to Hamas. But these targets were not Hamas. The veil of attacking a hostile group only holds so much weight when the places being targeted are hospitals, places of worship, and residential buildings. After over 50,000 reported civilian deaths, where is the Hamas they are fighting? It seems like the main goal is not to fight Hamas at all, but to cause as much destruction as possible to both the Muslim and Christian groups in the Gaza Strip. For a contemporary comparison, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine that has been going on since February 24th, 2022, 12,605 Ukrainian civilians have been killed. A large-scale invasion over the course of 3 years and 2 months has resulted in approximately 75% fewer civilian deaths than the war in the Gaza Strip, which began almost 2 full years after. And that's not even considering the fact that Ukraine has a population of 40 million, while the Gaza Strip has a population of 2 million. Russia has been lambasted and has faced consequences across the world over these deaths, and rightfully so. Where is the outrage over the Palestinians? Why are their lives meaningless? On the 16th of December, Israel airstriked the Young Men's Christian Association, or YMCA, headquarters in Gaza City. Like many other Christian groups in the area, the YMCA was using its headquarters to shelter hundreds of displaced people. The airstrike caused several deaths and even more injuries. The Israeli military said it was operating to dismantle Hamas military and administrative capabilities. But such boilerplate, hollow justifications with no evidence can no longer excuse the continual destruction of peaceful groups sheltering refugees. In response to this attack, the YMCA invited people to join them in prayer for the souls of those who were victims of the armed forces, as well as for the health of those who were wounded in this attack. They also condemned the attack on civilians and called on the Israeli government to stop its acts of indiscriminate violence. Though these calls fell on deaf ears, Israel's indiscriminate and mindless slaughter continued, and more innocent people were killed. On this same day, elsewhere without warning, the Holy Family Roman Catholic Church's Missionaries of Charity convent was bombed by an IDF tank. The convent was home to 54 disabled people, who were all thankfully rushed out without any fatalities. However, the building's generator and the fuel resources were destroyed with the first missile attack. This generator and its fuel supply powered the entire church compound, including the church itself. With their destruction, the compound was left without means to sustain people or provide basic necessities. Then the IDF fired at the building 2 more times, rendering the building inhabitable. The disabled refugees and nuns who cared for them were left not only without shelter, but without the essential resources needed to survive. Some of the disabled people now no longer having access to respirators that they needed to stay alive. But there was more to come. The IDF then attacked the church once again. Nahida Khalil Anton and Samar Kamal Anton were a Palestinian Catholic mother and daughter. They were killed by an IDF sniper on the grounds of the Holy Family Catholic Church. The two were seeking shelter in the church from the bloodshed outside, just as those in the Al-Ali Baptist Hospital, the St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church, the Tel Al-Hawa Orthodox Cultural Center, and the YMCA headquarters. But that didn't matter. The two were walking on their way to the sisters' convent, likely interested in the commotion that they had just heard. They were completely unarmed and unaware of any snipers, but that didn't matter. They were even inside the church's premises. But of course, that didn't matter either. The church had received no warning or notifications before the shooting started. Both Nahida and Samara were killed as one tried to carry the other to safety, and 7 more Catholic Palestinian refugees were wounded by gunfire as they tried to protect each other. The Latin Patriarchate sent out a statement condemning the attack and offering their condolences to the victims. The IDF and Israel's government first denied the attack, stating that there was no reports of a hit on the church, nor civilians being injured or killed. This was a lie. Subsequently, after the late Pope Francis himself made a statement condemning the attack, and after conducting an investigation, the IDF revealed a very different recounting of events. They claimed that Hamas terrorists launched an RPG at IDF troops from the vicinity of the church, and then the troops approached the area and identified 3 people in the vicinity operating as spotters for Hamas by guiding their attacks in the direction of the IDF troops. These spotters were then shot, and these 3 spotters did not match the description of the 2 women who died. They refused to elaborate on any part of this explanation. No explanation of their bombing of the church, no explanation of how those 2 women died, no evidence of the coincidental Hamas activity that no other onlookers saw, nothing. But they did say the following, quote, "The IDF takes many measures to reduce harm to civilians in the Gaza Strip, despite their complex fighting against a terrorist organization that does everything in its power to endanger citizens and uses them in various religious institutions as human shields for its terrorist activities." End quote. I have to suppose Hamas was using these human shields in the Al-Ali Baptist Hospital, the St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church, the Tel Al-Hawa Orthodox Cultural Center, the YMCA headquarters, and the Holy Family Roman Catholic Church. Though the IDF has released no evidence of any Hamas operations in any of these areas, they've also repeatedly published false narratives that go against on-the-ground eyewitnesses as well as the hierarchs of the local churches. No Christian has ever suggested that they house members of Hamas. So I'm to believe that the hierarchs are lying, the patriarchs are lying, the bishops are lying, the priests are lying, the laity are lying. Everyone is lying, besides the IDF and the Israeli government. Regardless of one's support of Hamas's militia, it is a fact that in all 5 of the aforementioned attacks against Christians during the first few months in this invasion of the Gaza Strip, the IDF has done nothing but act as a hostile aggressor, all the while lying about their operations and killing hundreds upon hundreds of innocent people. The arrival of the new year brought no reprieve. Throughout 2024, the war raged on, the killings of innocents continued, and the discrimination and abuse of Christians in Israel and Gaza persisted without end. As in the year before, encounters between Israeli citizens and Christian clergy were marked by one increasingly common act: spitting. What was years before a secretive endeavor has become a brazen display in recent years. Spitting is now carried out openly, at clergy, at pilgrims, even at holy sites, often in broad daylight, in full view of bystanders and security cameras, without care or consequence. As mentioned before, this behavior, along with much else, worsened following the election of the current government. But in the second half of 2024, something shifted even further. According to Christian leaders, these incidents have not only increased in number but in aggression. Verbal harassment has further intensified, and now clergy speak of a climate that feels volatile and hostile. Testimonies collected by the Rossing Center describe a disturbing pattern. In places like the Armenian Quarter and Mount Zion, priests and nuns are harassed nearly every time they step outside. A detailed list of all the reported attacks is available for reading. Going through the list would be repetitive, but the takeaway is that the harassment, spitting, physical attacking, cursing, defacement of holy sites, desecration and urination, and general disdain of Christianity has only gotten worse. To summarize, there were 46 incidents of physical attacks against Christians, including spitting, pepper spraying, and hitting or kicking, usually against clergymen, nuns, and monks, but sometimes against Christian laymen as well.
No, come on. Wait. Come on, bro.
Slav. Look!
There were 35 attacks on church property, including graffiti, trespassing or breaking into church compounds, damaging statues, throwing stones or garbage into church grounds, attempts to squat and seize church property, and even acts of arson. 14 incidents involved the defacement of public signs, including the erasure of names like Jesus or Yeshu, Saint Mary or Miriam, or the spray painting of Stars of David over crosses and other Christian symbols on road signs and monuments. 13 incidents involved harassment, including verbal abuse, protests, and attacks during Christian gatherings, or the production and spread of anti-Christian propaganda. Finally, there were 3 instances involving violations of religious freedom, like requests or pressure to remove religious symbols, limitations on access to religious sites, and restrictions on movement for attending services. This includes the previously mentioned events, such as the shutting down of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, restrictions on the Holy Fire ceremony, and others. It should be noted that in almost all instances, verbal harassment and spitting occur concurrently. But in order to not inflate the overall number of incidents, the incidents were categorized according to the dominant nature of each specific attack. It should also be noted that there was a significant decrease in mainstream media coverage on the harassment of Christians compared to 2023. So, though the number of crimes went up, media coverage went down, likely due to the ongoing coverage of the war in Gaza. It was Armenian Father Agan Gochian who had a personal story that was a telling summary of the situation in Israel. He is a priest, and the Armenian Patriarchate of Jerusalem's chancellor, who says he's regularly attacked by groups of Jewish settlers. He recalled one instance in November of 2024, when he was headed to prayer. He was intercepted by a group of settlers who asked if he was Christian. They said to him, quote, "You know that you don't have a future here in the Holy Land. You're not going to continue to live here. This is our country. We are going to eradicate you." This is the word he used, said Father Agan. We are going to eradicate you from our country.
האם זה בסדר לירוק על נוצרים?
אם הם עובדי עבודה זרה, אז אנחנו צריכים למוס בהם ולשקט אותם ולרמוס אותם ובעיקרון גם להרוג אותם, כי הרי גוי חייב בשם המצוות בלי נוח, ואם הוא לא מקיים את זה צריך להרוג אותו. אבל...
אתה תהרוג מישהו?
אם הייתי יכול, הייתי מאוד שמח לעשות את זה, אבל אין לנו בית דין, אז אנחנו לא יכולים לעשות את זה.
אוקיי. אבל זה אמונה של מישהו אחר.
זה אמונה שמישהו מאמין בה צריך להרוג אותו.
מי שמאמין שהאלוהים שלי הוא חלק מאיש, אז צריך להרוג אותו. מי שמזלזל באלוהים שלי, אז אני אהרוג אותו.
אז זה לא, אבל זה תפקיד שלכם. להרוג או לרעוק, זה לא התפקיד של אלוקים?
לא. השם אומר לנו מה לעשות.
הוא אומר, זה כתוב, להרוג? איפה? איפה כתוב?
היהדות תפקידה בעולם זה לעשות טוב, לגרום שהעולם יהיה נקי.
כן.
אז כל בן אדם שיאמין באיזה בן זונה אחד.
אבל איזה כתוב? אבל איפה זה כתוב?
איפה זה כתוב? בגמרא. אתה רוצה להביא גמרא? אנחנו יכולים להביא גמרא ולראות.
אבל הגמרא זה כתוב על ידי אנשים, לא על ידי...
על ידי אנשים שהקדוש ברוך הוא שלח חכמים שכתוב בתורה של להקשיב להם.
There is a growing sense of fear and sorrow among many who are watching the current situation continue to unfold. The political climate feels increasingly volatile, and there is a deep unease about what is happening to innocent people caught in its path. One cannot help but be disturbed by how cheaply life is treated, how quickly it is discarded. Even the most sacred places, holy sites that have been revered and protected for centuries, now face dangers greater than ever before. For Christians, this moment feels particularly heavy. The faith has endured centuries of persecution, war, and martyrdom. Yet, in many ways, it seems the threat against Christians in Jerusalem hasn't been so severe in many centuries. On July 29, 2024, an Israeli battle tank fired a missile at the St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church in Gaza. The missile crashed into an annex of the church, causing structural damage as it broke through the roof into the building, landing right in front of refugees inside of the church and causing injury. Miraculously, the missile failed to detonate, sparing the lives of all who would have immediately died otherwise. Among these saved was Ramez Suhail al-Suri, a Palestinian Christian father. When the war first started, he and his wife Helen and his 3 children, 14-year-old Suhail, 12-year-old Julie, and 11-year-old Maj, fled to the St. Porphyrius Church seeking shelter like many other innocents. Before the war, all 3 of al-Suri's children attended the Roman Catholic Holy Family School discussed earlier, one of the most prestigious in Gaza. Before the war, Julie wanted to be a dentist, Suhail wanted to be an accountant, and Maj wanted to study business. All three of them planned to compete in a Bible memorization competition in the West Bank in 2023 before the war broke out. They memorized the Bible and were actually waiting for permits to leave Gaza when the war began, and they had to seek shelter in the St. Porphyrius Church. Julie, Suhail, and Maj were 3 of the 18 refugees killed in the first St. Porphyrius attack in October of 2023. They never got the chance to show the public their recital skills on earth, but surely they're reciting the Bible in heaven. El-Suri said, quote, "On October 19th, I lost my entire life. My life now has no meaning. I lost 3 children in a few seconds, and now their mother and I are alone. This is what the war on Gaza did to me." End quote. That's what this war has been. Countless stories of innocents mindlessly being slaughtered. Muslims, Christians, it makes no difference. These people are not evil. They are not mindless. They live, they marry, they father and mother children, they nurture relationships, and they love one another. They participate in their community. Those who write Palestinians off as nothing but Hamas, or for whatever reason, be it faith or collective responsibility, say they all deserve to die. Did Suhail deserve to die? Did Julie? Did Maj? Unlike the first bombing, the IDF provided no justification or excuse for the second bombing. They are past the point of explaining themselves. The Patriarchate once more denounced the attack, as did the World Council of Churches, with the WCC saying, quote, "We unequivocally condemn those attacks on civilians. These actions not only harm innocent people but also exacerbate the already dire situation faced by the people of Gaza, further fueling the cycle of violence. Governments have the responsibility of protecting and securing the rights of all civilians." End quote. The war shows no signs of stopping, and the local Christians are losing hope. It's not just the war, but it's all the administrative discrimination and subjugation, the person-to-person hate crimes, the municipalities, the police force, the country's government, the anti-Christian hate organizations, the apparatus against Christianity. Currently, 1 in 3 Christians in Israel are contemplating leaving the country. That number is 48% for people under 30. It's feared that Jerusalem will soon become no more than a relic of Christianity, a place where they are no longer accepted. The paths that Christ once walked now restricted from his followers. Recently, a small shred of hope made its way to the public. A ceasefire proposal mediated by the US, Egypt, and Qatar was accepted by Hamas on May 5, 2024, and publicly presented by President Joe Biden on May 31st. The UN Security Council endorsed it as Resolution 2735 on June 10th, but it fell through with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas both being accused of delaying its implementation. After Donald Trump was elected US President, he joined Biden in pressuring Israel to accept a similar plan. A revised version of the proposal was agreed upon by Hamas and Israel on January 15, 2025, and officially signed and approved by the Israeli Security and full cabinet 2 days later. However, there was much tension, and everything would need to go perfectly from both sides for this ceasefire to last. Unfortunately, Israel violated the ceasefire 265 times. 118 people were killed in the Gaza Strip since the ceasefire began on the 19th of January. Many of the victims were adults under 25, and further, even children less than 18 years old. In some cases, children in the single digits of age. For comparison, the greatest deviations from the ceasefire that Hamas committed was releasing the wrong hostages or wrong corpses, which in many cases were corrected the day after. Certain Middle Eastern political analysts suggested that Israel was never truly looking to establish a ceasefire in good faith. After all, PM Benjamin Netanyahu himself says Israel won't stop the war until it destroys Hamas, and that's clearly a distinction only he can make. Hamas is clearly not entirely obliterated, and if what's already been happening continues to happen, then destroying Hamas means killing tens of thousands of more civilians. It's scary to think to what extent Israel plans to take this war, this genocide. Will Hamas operations keep getting attacked until every communal building housing refugees is destroyed? The Christians in Gaza and Israel pray it doesn't go there, and that peace is achieved as soon as possible. Though it seems that peace is a pipe dream for now, as early in the morning of March 18, 2025, Israel conducted a surprise offensive of airstrikes on Gaza, thereby shattering the almost 2-month truce. Though they had broken the ceasefire 265 times, this was seen as a step further, a full-on resuming of the onslaught on the Palestinians. Israeli forces acknowledged that they were conducting extensive strikes. Their attack plan was kept in closed circles in the IDF to create an element of surprise and deception. The airstrikes killed more than 400 Palestinians according to Gaza's Ministry of Health. The White House national security spokesman has blamed Hamas for Israel's renewed strikes, saying that the group could have released the hostages to extend the ceasefire, but instead chose refusal and war. For context, following the ceasefire that began on January 19, 2025, negotiations were underway to extend the truce and facilitate further hostage releases. However, Hamas rejected proposals for a temporary extension, insisting on a comprehensive agreement that would include a permanent end to hostilities, the release of Palestinian prisoners, and the reconstruction of Gaza. They desired a promise of permanent peace instead of temporary peace in exchange for the hostages. So, the characterization of Hamas's actions from the White House were extremely untrustworthy. Israeli journalist Barak Ravid, who was once a member of the IDF, argued that while journalists described the resumption of airstrikes as being a result of a collapse, the ceasefire was deliberately collapsed by the Israeli government itself. As of the writing of this part of the script on April 17, 2025, Hamas wants a comprehensive deal to end the war in Gaza and swap all Israeli hostages for Palestinians jailed in Israel. They've rejected Israel's offer of an interim truce. In a televised speech, Khalil al-Hayya, the group's Gaza chief, who leads its negotiation team, said,
Hamas movement is ready to immediately negotiate a deal to swap all hostages with an agreed number of Palestinians jailed by Israel. To end completely the war against our people and to fully withdraw from Gaza Strip and to start the reconstruction in Gaza. Netanyahu and his government use partial agreements as a cover for their political agenda, which is based on continuing the war of extermination and starvation.
القائمة على استمرار الحرب والإبادة والتجويع حتى لو كان الثمن.
Even if the price is sacrificing all his hostages, we will not be part of passing this.
Adopting a position that Israel is unlikely to accept. As for the Christians in the region, the Holy Fire service was still held, and thankfully there was an attendance that was larger than years past, but still not nearly reaching the attendance seen before 2020. The police and military presence was heavy as pilgrims went through checkpoints reaching the Holy Fire service. Inside, it was noted that there were likely more policemen than actual attendees. The situation was much more tense than any religious miracle such as this should be. Notably, an Armenian Oriental Orthodox Christian witnessed an Israeli police officer placing his foot on the stone of anointing, the site where Jesus' body was prepared for burial following the crucifixion. When the Armenian pointed this out, the officer removed his foot. However, one of his colleagues then violently expelled the Armenian and his brother from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This event was recorded and goes to show how quick some in the police are to pounce on Christians for no justified reason.
Today, the Christian presence faces many challenges. Some of these challenges are the systematic attempts to rid Jerusalem of the historic Christian community by groups of Israeli radicals, some the result of policy initiatives, and some the result of war in Gaza. Our monastery of St. Porphyrios in Gaza was further damaged by an Israeli missile in August. The compound of the Catholic parish of the Holy Family suffered damage, and the adjacent school was damaged by an air raid in August. The Anglican Al-Ahli Hospital has continued to offer medical treatment but has ongoing concerns about the hospital staff and its ability to be resupplied more fully and regularly. These attacks on Christian properties raise concerns about the ongoing preservation of historical and spiritual sites, as well as the targeting of innocent civilians. It is feared that this ancient Christian community in Gaza has now dwindled to under 600 people. Throughout the West Bank and Jerusalem, the economic situation continues to deteriorate because of the lack of pilgrims, the scarcity of jobs, and the unstable security situation in the West Bank and Jerusalem. The patriarchs and heads of the churches have not ceased to reiterate our calls for a lasting and effective ceasefire, economic support for rebuilding church-run hospitals, schools, and charities, and access for the heads of the churches to Gaza. Yet, even before the war, there were ongoing issues that still persist that we should not lose sight of. For some years, there has been financial pressure on the churches. The constant threat of the imposition of a municipal tax, also known as Arnona, on church property remains a serious concern and financial burden for the churches and violates the centuries-old status quo. This harkens back to unfair attempts to tax the churches in the last decade, when we were forced to the unprecedented act of closing the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in protest.
You've heard just a bit of what is happening to Christians in Israel. Even a video as long as this cannot begin to explain all that the Christians are going through, the hardship they're facing. So, what can we do? The main thing I would suggest is offer your generosity to the churches. The local churches have fundraisers that they publish online in an attempt to raise funds during trying times. It's unbelievable how little is raised for the most important region in Christianity. So I have linked below a genuine fundraiser you can trust. I've personally donated $100 to the Aid for St. Porphyrios Orthodox Church Gaza fundraiser linked below. This supports the Orthodox Church in the area to not only help rebuild the St. Porphyrios Church, but also the homes, schools, and other churches that need to be rebuilt. Children and families will need their basic needs met, and they would like to help with comfort items, like toys and stuffies for the affected children. Please find it in your heart to help the church during these trying times. Besides that, let's pray for our struggling brothers and sisters in Israel. Let's pray that they are able to stay strong. Let's pray for the hierarchs of the Orthodox Church in Jerusalem and the hierarchs of every other church in Jerusalem. Let's pray for Patriarch Theophilos III and for all the clergymen and hierarchs who are at risk of being attacked every day. If you appreciated this video and made it this far, thank you. God bless you all. Please join me in a prayer for those suffering in Israel. We pray, Lord our God, for all those who suffer from acts of war, especially for the victims and all those struggling in Israel and Palestine. We pray for thy peace and thy mercy in the midst of the great suffering that people are now inflicting on each other. Accept the prayers of thy church, so that by thy goodness peace may return to all peoples. Hear us and have mercy on us. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Lord our God, remember and have mercy on our brothers and sisters who are involved in every civil conflict. Remove from their minds all hostility, confusion, and hatred. Lead everyone along the path of reconciliation and peace, we pray thee. Hear us and have mercy on us. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Let all believers turn aside from violence and do what makes for peace. By the strength of thy mighty arm, save your people in thy holy church. Let all believers turn aside from violence and do what makes for peace. By the strength of thy mighty arm, save thy people and thy holy church from all evil oppression. Hear the supplications of all who call to thee in sorrow and affliction, day and night. Merciful God, Let their lives not be lost, we pray thee. Hear us and have mercy. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. But grant, O Lord, peace, love, and speedy reconciliation to thy people, whom thou hast redeemed with thy precious blood. Make thy presence known to those who have turned away from thee and do not seek thee, so that none of them may be lost, but all may be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth, so that everyone, in true love and harmony, O long-suffering Lord, may praise thine all-holy name. Amen.